welcome to the Business of Story. I'm Park Howell, and I'm so glad you're here today. You may have heard that relationships are the atomic unit of a successful business. But for some, building those relationships is too time-consuming and expensive. Therefore, today, you'll learn how to use storytelling to build a community of raving fans that will reduce your costs of marketing and dramatically increase your profits by simply loving the ones who love you. We've been building a community of evangelists around the ABT, the and, but, therefore, Agile Narrative Framework, for several years now, and we'd love to add you to this amazing group.
That's why we need a really great framework, and I've loved the ABT for that. It helps me go back to that primal moment where I remember that a story has to be all about uh-huh, uh-oh, aha.
For sales, there's just nothing like it. I have used it with many of the people that I coach and work with, and it has changed their messaging completely.
Hey, it's Felix Ayala at Casa de Papa Gourmet Tacos. The arts of ABT storytelling is amazing. This valuable knowledge is applicable to all aspects of my business, and I find myself using it all the time.
To me, the most interesting part is the but. I think we're always looking for research that sets up tension in a way that can kind of grab people and maybe surprise them. So I love that idea of kind of establishing a shared vision, demonstrating maybe an obstacle or a contradiction, and then showing how you could help them pave a path forward. I love it.
Hey everyone, I'm Carl Cyprian. I'm a habit change consultant and founder at Passion Valley LLC Consulting. The ABT of Storytelling by Park Howell has been a game changer for me. As a new business owner, I struggled, I was frustrated with trying to create that story, that mission, that brand for my company to attract the right clients, the right market. Park sat down with me and helped me create my story. He helped me to build confidence and gain clarity that now I know when my clients do see me, they see the big picture and they're going to want to buy my product because I'm solving their problem. Park, thank you for your ABT storytelling. And I highly, highly, highly recommend everyone else to seek out Park Howell because he will help change your life like he did mine. Thanks.
You just heard in order Daniel Nessel of Lixil and host of the Daniel Nessel Show. Alice Hyman, an internationally acclaimed sales strategist for CEOs. Alex Ayala, a restaurateur. Abby Lunny at the Harris Poll. And Carl Cyprian. Just a few of the voices in our incredible ABT community, and we would love to have you there too. Because now you can take the ABTs of Agile Communications short online course and start leveraging this messaging marvel in all of your communications. Use the ABT to get people to actually respond to your emails. Make your LinkedIn bio way more compelling. Increase your social media engagement by 400% plus, like one of our clients just did. Or focus your sales presentations using the ABT to close more deals faster, like our friends at Upwork, Medela, and the Home Depot, who have been doing the same with the ABT for a few years now. Or you can even use it to craft landing page copy that actually lands your prospects nearly every time. Essentially, anytime and anywhere you need to have your message land right the first time, every time, use the ABT. In fact, if there is one resolution you should make in the new year, at least in my humble opinion, is to hit the Narrative Gym for Business book and the ABTs of Agile Communications online course to revolutionize how you communicate as a more confident, persuasive, and influential storyteller. Just visit businessofstory.com/ABT and start your journey with the ABT today. That's at businessofstory.com/ABT. If you're an avid listener, then you know that the Business of Story is my platform to build and grow a community of business storytellers who are making a tremendous impact in the world. Building that platform is just one of the ways. Our guest today will show you how to build your own community of raving fans.
Community building is an exercise of recognizing the value of the people around you and connecting that to the value of the people trying to seek it, and doing that over and over again. That's what ends up building community. But in order to do that, you need some kind of platform, you need some kind of place to observe it, right? You need to engage with people consistently in order to get to know them and understand what their value is and understand what their pains are. And you need a way to then share it.
Pablo Gonzalez is founder and CEO of BeTheStage.live. He's also the host of the B2B Community Builder and Not Your Average Investor podcast, and he invented the Relationship Flywheel, a method that generated $40 million from a podcast community in just 1 year. No wonder he has been named a Latino leader of the future and a top 20 under 40 business professional in various publications. Pablo believes that having a community is the ultimate competitive advantage for a business, and the savviest entrepreneurs understand that. But they don't consider community building as a Monday morning problem. Therefore, they need a strategy that builds community in the long term while satisfying short-term goals. Pablo's going to show you how to do that. He has been on a 9-year journey to implement community building in business development until he cracked the code in 2020 by launching a community that generated $40 million in year one for a $150 million company. Pretty amazing, huh? You'll learn how you can start building and growing your own community of stark, raving fans like Pablo has, who, by the way, is a member of my community. And he's absolutely mad about the ABT, but in all the best ways. So please welcome to the Business of Story my good friend and community leader, Pablo Gonzalez. Pablo, my friend, welcome to the show.
Park, it is good to be here with the world's most industrious storyteller, man. This is a big moment for me.
Well, we got acquainted, was it about a year ago when you were so kind to have me on your excellent podcast, one of your many podcasts you produce out there. And I just have really enjoyed learning more about you and getting better acquainted. We've never met in person, but we certainly have shared lots of emails, swapped a lot of social media and LinkedIn posts, and it's just a delight to have you on our show.
Appreciate you, man. Yeah, likewise. I heard you first on Lockhead's podcast, and I think at that point,
Christopher Locke.
Yeah. I think you really opened up his eyes to the ABT because he was a real promoter for it, and that made the rounds in like the marketing communities that I was a part of. And, I feel fortunate enough to have my own little stage that I could then reach out to you and build a relationship with you, man. So I think it's been about a year, and I've really enjoyed watching everything that you've done and your content ever since. So I feel real lucky about it.
Well, thanks for that, Pablo. And you are just simply modeling what you believe and what you teach the most, and that is around community building. If you want to build a vibrant brand without killing yourself and breaking the bank in advertising, marketing, and all those other things, it comes down to what you're doing right here. And what you did when you invited me on your show is started building a community of like-minded people. And I say like-minded because, we don't want to live in a vacuum, but by the same token, if you're selling something, you need to find like-minded individuals that you can help. And that's exactly what you've been doing. How did you start or find yourself in this community building expert mode?
When I was in Miami in around like 2011-ish, I got an email to help start a young professionals group for Habitat for Humanity, right? And at the time, I had just come back to Miami from living in LA. And I was starting my first business, a green building consulting company. And I thought that doing this group would be a good business development tool for me, which I wasn't right about, but it did lead to these other amazing externalities. And what I mean by that is we started this group of young professionals for Habitat. That then got me on the board of Habitat. That then got me in this like Leadership Miami program. It got me on multiple other like boards of charities. 2 years into that, I sold my company to my biggest client. I got acquired and I went in-house as director of sustainability. And at that point, I thought I had really made it, right? Like I had some money in my pocket. I had this like really cool title and I felt that I was there. But a couple years into that, right, the entrepreneur that had originally brought me on and brought me in, who I really admired, sold out and he got acquired and he left. And at that point, I kind of found myself really pigeonholed, right? Like I had this like amazing title and a cool job inside this like hospital builder and university park developer and stuff like that. But I wasn't being utilized to any kind of like talent level that I wanted. I was working like maybe 20 hours a week. And if it weren't for having this like community stuff that I was doing, I would have just been in a dead end. And what happened was, Park, two things happened within like 3 months of each other. One was that my brother passed away. And at his...
I'm sorry to hear that.
I appreciate it, man. At his funeral, 1,200 people showed up. And, you know, I looked around this church, and no matter what, you know, what I felt about the Catholic religion, which I've had my ins and outs in, you know, since I was about a teenager, at that moment I looked around and I saw these people and I thought, these people are my community. And regardless of the religious aspect of this stuff, I can never leave this group, period, because there's no way that we could have made it through these last 2 years. There's no way that we could have made it through these moments right now if it weren't for this community. And in some weird way at that moment, I connected this idea of churn and community creation, right? Like this idea that this is a business model, right? Like this is a business case, this idea of bringing people community. And if the Catholic Church can do it, it has to exist everywhere else. And then I started making these like connections with, if I buy a Harley Davidson in 2 years, I can't get a Honda motorcycle because I'm going to lose my friends. And, you know, like I just started seeing it everywhere. And shortly after that, right, I was in this moment of feeling like a real loser inside of my company and thinking that I was going to get laid off because my title really didn't match the future of what the company was going to be, and trying to be more valuable myself. And the new CEO got invited to speak on a panel about smart cities in front of the Economic Development Agency of Miami. And he decided at the last moment he didn't want to go. So he sends me in his stead. And I show up to the Economic Development Agency. Unbeknownst to me, I'm in a room in front of about like 70 people, and I share the stage with the head of like Cisco Systems for Latin America and the head of the Smart Cities Initiative for the World Bank. And at that point, you know, it was too late for me to back out, right? And luckily, because I had done all this like charity stuff, I had gotten really good at public speaking and being on stages. So I do my thing. And for the first time ever, when I walked off the stage, there was a line of 7 people deep waiting to talk to me. And I realized in that moment that everybody there thought I was more important than I was. And the reason it was happening is because I've always been obsessed with influence. I've always been obsessed with relationship building. And I've studied the brain. And I knew that the brain, I think I just heard this on your last episode, right? The brain is a storytelling, you know, mechanism, not a
story processor, not a logic
processor, not a logic processor, right? And when
that came from Jonathan Haidt, you know, just a fabulous American social psychologist who I also had on my show. But yeah, my guest last week, Jason Harris, reminded me of that quote, and I thought, man, it is so true, isn't it? We process meaning through the use of stories, not logic, not data, not numbers. Turn your data into drama if you want to connect.
Correct. Right. So like when you're in an audience and you see somebody on the stage, your brain is telling you the story that person on that stage belongs there and you belong in the audience. Right. So it adds this like aggregate value and aggregate validation of whatever you're saying. And if you're on a stage being guilty by association with people of a certain level, then your brain is telling you the story that you're at that level, that person, those three people are at that level. And at that moment, everybody in that room thought that I was on par with the head of Latin America for Cisco Systems and the head of the Smart Cities Initiative for the World Bank. Mm-hmm. And I immediately recognized that. And my brain immediately went to like, oh, I can do this trick. Because since I've been building these communities and I've had these like young professional groups and I've been doing these events, I can reach out to a developer in South Miami that's building a high rise in a low density, high income area. But what they're doing is building on top of the metro rail. And even though nobody wants it there, it's still trans-oriented development. And they're trying to like incentivize public transportation. And I can get a politician on the board of one of my charities to share a stage with them and invite my little audience and tell them that we're going to have an event about the future of public transportation and make that introduction and give them that effect. And I effectively pulled that off. And, this project that was a much maligned project that was having a hard time getting built by a very influential developer, when he got a call from a contractor offering that, he said yes immediately. And we pulled off the event at no cost. And a month later, we were back to working a $60 million project that we had no shot at. And that turned me into a business developer. Right. So that was my first kind of like putting together this idea that if you can congeal a community as an audience and you can figure out ways to serve that audience by talking with people that they want to meet about subjects that they're interested about, and you can create that vehicle as a way to highlight people that are interesting and tell their stories and create these introductions and have that as the flywheel that creates interactions and gets people to recognize each other's values and share it, then we got something here. And I've been following that path, recognizing that I can do that not just through these live events, but I can do that on Zoom calls. And if I'm doing it on a Zoom call, or if I'm capturing content at these events, then I can repurpose it and it can go into all sorts of different pieces of the marketing and business development pie. And, it's brought me to this idea of these like content engagements. How can you build relationships with people while creating content around it and distribute it tactically in a way that if you do it over and over again becomes this relationship flywheel that leads to community?
And is that where you came up with that idea of the relationship flywheel? And if so, what is your absolute definition of it?
I came up with the language of the relationship flywheel midway through 2020 once I proved this process out at scale, right? My absolute definition of a relationship flywheel is essentially that all businesses want to accelerate digital word of mouth. And the ultimate version of digital word of mouth is a well-formed community. But forming a community is not a Monday morning problem for businesses. Therefore, what they need is a high ROI activity that feeds short-term goals, such as these content engagements, that if you do over and over, create a flywheel that leads to that ultimate goal of relationships and community. And that's what the relationship flywheel is. It's this methodology of just understanding what the value is that the people you're trying to serve are seeking and who you can co-create that with. Do that in a version where you are building a relationship one-to-one with that person that you're trying to be guilty by association with in front of the people that you're trying to serve, and then repurpose that content in a way that makes that next content co-creation moment more valuable, and it just keeps building on itself as a flywheel does.
So to paraphrase, what I'm hearing you say, Pablo, is when you are building a community, you have to use storytelling to first identify and invite in those peeps, that like-minded tribe that you are all going to grow together. But then to keep them, you have to deliver on all those promises you made in those stories to get them in there in the first place so that they become an active participant and sharer of that particular story. And that ignites the flywheel. From there on, it's word-of-mouth marketing, it's repeat business, it's what helps lubricate the sleds for business growth through the stories you share and through the people you share them. Because storytelling is totally scalable, isn't it? When you hear a good story, when you participate in an unbelievable story, let me share one with you. Here's one that just happened. And I'm hoping a huge community gets built around this guy's jewelry store. I don't even know the name of it, but I'm going to go into town next week, or this week actually, in Flagstaff. My wife was in there last week. She goes into the jewelry store to get my band fixed on my watch and to help resize a ring that wasn't fitting anymore. She leaves the store, and by the way, it's starting to snow outside in northern Arizona and Flagstaff. She goes to Safeway. She's running around Safeway buying the stuff. She gets to the counter and realizes she's lost her phone. She looks all around, retraces her trail in Safeway, can't find the phone, get out there, says, can you call it? And they call it. It's not ringing on her. It's not ringing. No one picks it up in the store. And so she's like, oh, my God, I can't believe it. Well, thank you. She goes, gets in the car. Snow's falling a little bit more. She starts driving off, and she goes, no, I can't give up. I got to go back and find my phone. Goes back into Safeway, and there's the phone. And what had happened is they dialed her phone. The jeweler next door found her phone. It rang. It said Safeway, incoming call from Safeway. He looks up her receipt, finds her name, puts her number, her name on the phone, takes it over to the manager at Safeway and said, I think this is the phone that you might be looking for from one of your customers. Lost it in my store next door. Michelle goes back in, finds the phone, comes home and tells me this amazing story. So by that guy's altruistic efforts in the store, I'm going to go back in there and get her a special holiday Christmas present. Don't tell her. Thank him for doing that. But now I want to share that story with you because it's such an amazing story. And maybe those in Flagstaff are going to build a little bit more of community around this guy's efforts. Just a thought.
That's beautiful, man. So that's the story, right? And then that becomes the seed. The way to build a flywheel around that is the idea of how do you create Eddie Yoon, who's one of the category pirates, talked about this on my show, right? There's no more valuable client acquisition tool than two of your super consumers telling a story about how valuable you are to them, about your business, in front of somebody that's debating whether or not they should do business with you, right? So if you can find a way to manufacture these stories and capture them, and then create engagements, interaction points where the people that experience that story and know that story is true are telling that story in front of the person that's wondering whether or not, what your character may be, then you have now systemized that in a way that continues to share. And this idea of like layering content creation on top of these moments of like over delivery or, really seeing what's valuable to your clientele, that's the fuel for creating these stories and capturing them and being able to like accelerate that digital word of mouth.
And I want to be clear, when you say manufacturing a story, it's not making something up. It's not fiction. I think what you're saying is do something, make something happen that people then can talk about and share with their world.
Yeah, create a story assembly line, as it were, right? Not make up a story, but like make stories happen, right?
Well, and you've been so kind in my Relationship Flywheel in that you had me on your show and you are espousing the ABT everywhere. So I want to really thank you for that. And people have come to me, said, I heard you on Pablo's show. What's this ABT thing? Or, hey, I took a shot at an ABT and I send it, they'll email it to me and I'll work with them on that.
That's awesome.
And so I, number one, really appreciate that. And you are modeling this community building so well. And then when I ask you for some questions that we could cover on the show, I love the fact that you showed up in the form of an ABT. So let's read the first one and let's dive into it a little bit, right? You said relationships are the atomic unit of business. And we all know that intuitively, but think it's too time consuming. Therefore, creating content around your key relationships leverages your time and increases the ROI of your time. So you've got that set up. We know it's important, but we think it's too time consuming. Therefore, do this if you want greater ROI. Let's explore that a little bit.
Please. I would love to hear from the
master. Why does that work? How does that work? And how using the ABT did that help you focus this particular topic?
I'm a big believer in category design, right? So like I'm always trying to figure out what is the problem I am solving, right? And I think we get lost as business people in business people babble of like lower cost of client acquisition and higher lifetime value and all these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, there really isn't a more precious resource than time. Therefore, what I was trying to do is tie that pain point, right? Like tie that benefit to time, which is one of the number one concerns that a business owner has, right? Like as an entrepreneur myself, my time is about as precious as it gets. And if I can tie a desired outcome and make the impediment time, but be able to take out that time piece to deliver that desired outcome in a way that, creates a non-obvious solution to an obvious problem, then I think I'm cooking with grease, right? So in my estimation of that, as I've heard you break down a bunch of ABTs, is I wonder if it's clean enough. I wonder if it ties it throughout, and if that pain to original desired state is linear enough all the way to like the big idea at the back end.
And the ABT helps you do that. You've got to spend the time and the energy up front to really think through all that so that you can arrive at an ABT that your audience doesn't have to work for. I mean, your message is so crystal clear, it just lands right the first time in under 15 seconds, right? And it keeps everybody in the audience on board with what you're talking about, and then you build on that foundation. It's like the cornerstone to communication, I believe.
Oh, totally, man. And like, kind of to your point of what you're saying of why you get so many messages from people that I'm like evangelizing the ABT to and sending your way. It's because, as you can imagine, right, you've been part of my podcast. You've been part of my show. Every one of these shows, and we teach the methodology of the Relationship Flywheel, right? So this idea of creating these like weekly content engagements to create that assembly line of the stories that you can then share through content involve writing an invitation, writing a show description, writing social media captions for the pieces. We take that 1 hour interaction and turn it into 12 pieces of content like we gifted you. And every single one of those, we try to insert an ABT into the formula of communication of when we share it in written form. And on top of that, I'm teaching people how to do a podcast, host a podcast, and create the story framework of the podcast through an ABT lens, right? Like, insert the idea first of what is valuable to the audience and why it's particularly important in this time, but insert that conflict of like what could make you stop. Therefore, boom, the big idea of why the solution that we're presenting on the show is this thing. So we've literally just like gone like 5 layers deep into everything that we do with the ABT and how to develop this methodology. And ever since we've started doing it that way and teaching it, we're just getting much better results. It's much quicker and much easier to actually do this stuff. As a result, you get a bunch of referrals, man.
And it takes practice, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Pablo, you're a smart guy. You're a communicator. You can own a room. I'm sure you can own a pen when you're writing out your blog posts, and you certainly own your podcast hosting it. But it doesn't matter how good of a communicator or storyteller you are. This ABT is short and sweet, but tricky. You have to practice it, don't you?
Yeah, Park. And it, like you got to practice it. But here's the deal. I read 4 other books on storytelling by the time I listened to that podcast with Lockhead, right? Like I read Joseph Campbell's Journey. I read Business Storytelling. I read Donald Millard's book. All these things are super powerful.
Weren't they working for you?
Yeah.
Didn't they work for you?
It works. It works. And you can see the power of it, but I can only use it in certain scenarios. That's why when I found the ABT, it's like this thing that I could literally I've used it like 6 times in the last 20 minutes. I couldn't have used it. I couldn't have used Donald Miller's building a story brand in the last 20 minutes more than once, right? Like maybe we can get a full episode out of that thing. I just love the idea of being able to like insert these things in every single piece of communication that I do. And, I feel like the smartest guy in the room when I give somebody that tip. So because of that, literally Sunday, it was my buddy's 50th birthday party. I gave him the narrative gym for business as a gift.
Oh, you're too kind, Pablo. You're too kind. Well, the thing about building a community too, so let's go back to that for a minute because the ABT is helpful in that. What do you need most when you're building a community? Doesn't it come down to truly understanding your audience,
Yes.
appreciating what they want and why it's important to them, and empathizing with them, but why don't they have it? So the ABT as a content creator makes you place your audience at the center of the story. And if you are going to build a community of like-minded people, you better know and like what their mind is about, correct?
100%, man. Listen, community building is an exercise of recognizing the value of the people around you and connecting that to the value of the people trying to seek it. And doing that over and over again, that's what ends up building community. But in order to do that, you need some kind of platform, you need some kind of place to observe it, right? You need to engage with people consistently in order to get to know them and understand what their value is and understand what their pains are. And you need a way to then share it, right? So this idea of community building for me, I've distilled it down to that piece, right? Like these idea of these like live internet talk shows or what we do at trade shows, it really has to implement both things. It has to implement close contact so that you're getting that qualitative feedback, and you have to be able to layer on this place where once you understand that feedback, you can then serve that need that is required in order to build that community. And then you need a smart way to share it, right? You need a production process in order to then take that, half an hour conversation and be able to, take this one seed and plant it in 15 different pots that you can share across 6 different ecosystems, right? So like that's kind of the whole thing.
Pablo, you are becoming the GOAT of the ABT on my show,
like it?
The greatest of all time, because nobody has used the ABT so many times to advance the narrative as a guest on the Business of Story. Thank you for that. And I'm going to now go to the next ABT, category number 2 we're going to talk about. You wrote, having a community is the ultimate competitive advantage for a business. And the savviest entrepreneurs understand that, but they don't consider community building a Monday morning problem. Therefore, they need a strategy that builds community in the long term while satisfying short-term goals. Pablo, what do you mean by a Monday morning problem?
I don't think that the CEO of a company is getting the Sunday scaries, trying to think about like, how am I going to have a community by the end of this week? They're getting the Sunday scaries thinking, how do I fill my pipeline? How do I communicate with my team so that they understand like how to really please a client? Things of this sort, right? That is the Monday morning problem that CEOs, that CMOs, that VPs of business development or VPs of sale are really, really thinking about. And in my experience of trying to sell community, people really are interested in it. But if you're not satisfying that short-term thing that's really like taking over their schedule and dominating their headspace, you're never going to get anywhere, right? So it was upon me to figure out this idea that I could inception community on the way there, right? Like, and the clearest story for that is the people that we use as our number one case study, right? This company JWB here out of Jacksonville, who's this like fascinating real estate investing company that's completely vertically integrated the ability to invest in rental income housing, right? Like they in-house acquire the land, build on it, or, like remodel the property, fill it with tenants. They have a property management arm. Then they give you a portfolio manager. You're buying these like single family homes as just like cash flowing assets and you own them outright. And they've been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal multiple times. So the founder, who was the CMO at the time, one of the co-founders, he thought that what he needed was a way to tell that story and the way to show how what they do is completely different than the rest of the real estate world. And you can get these like real estate returns that are better than the stock market at like the risk level of a bond. But when he was trying to make all this content and try to share that story, he just didn't feel right looking at a phone and like trying to create content. It wasn't him to to be the influencer and be the head storyteller. So when I met with him, what I told him was, listen, Greg, you don't have to be that guy. Like you don't have to lead the charge in these stories. These stories are all around you. And if we can start this once a week show where we can talk to people in your community, people that you've helped, investors that you've worked with, and the overall Jacksonville ecosystem that you need to facilitate in order to like make these deals happen. And if we can show up weekly talking about them, to your clientele and your prospects about the things that they care about, right? If you're going to buy a rental income property in Jacksonville, Florida, you care about knowing about real estate, knowing about other asset classes, knowing about Jacksonville, right? So like why Jacksonville instead of hairy knuckle Florida? And then just knowing that you're investing with the right team, right? So like what skills in-house can you teach so that people just like are very certain that you're wise on the subject, and you just repeat that over and over. And at first he's like, really, man? I thought what they wanted to know was the numbers. I was like, nah, man, you gotta let these people tell, you gotta tell these people the stories of why these numbers are real, right? They're asking themselves, is this interesting? Yes. They're already kind of talking to you, but then they're going to ask themselves, do they trust you? And is this for me? So if you can show all these stories where people can trust you and they see other people like them doing it, then they're going to want to like buy in on this thing. So we started this thing in January of 2020, and the idea, he wasn't looking for community, right? Like he was just looking for, how do I fill my sales pipeline and make it so that my sales cycles aren't as long? And what we ended up effectively doing is by December 2020, we were having a fan appreciation show, and it was like client after client coming on talking about how, this show has been so valuable to them. This is why they do business with JWB, and it's because they feel like they're a part of this community. And that led to a $40 million channel that we stood up during COVID times when the stock market was going crazy. So people had every reason to like go buy Peloton stock and Zoom stock instead. Instead, we were able to just draw all this demand into this asset class because people really got to understand it through the stories of people that lived the success and being able to like educate them over and over again and connecting them to each other.
Well, and again, it's the story about them, about the people, about the community members, not about the brand. The brand plays that more important role of mentor or guide.
Correct.
You had mentioned earlier about Harley Davidson, which is a great example of a tribe. Everybody knows that. I would probably throw Apple in there. Maybe not as strong as it used to be, but when they were really coming out to dominate Microsoft, a real tribe grew up around Apple. And I mean, they're still there today, certainly. What's another brand that really stands out in your mind that is operationalizing this relationship flywheel every Monday morning? Because there are strength in numbers. When you talk about the numbers in your community, there's strength in having those people there. What brand is doing a really good job in community building?
I think Salesforce is doing a really good job in community building, right? Like they have.
How so?
Yeah. The ultimate kind of like flex on community building is when you take over all of San Francisco for Dreamforce, right? Like when people are dying to like show up to like your one party to meet each other, that's when you really, really know you got it, right? So I think that Salesforce has done it at a massive scale. Who else? I think Disney does a really good job at this. I think Disney may be probably the greatest story. You may be the most industrious storyteller in the world. I think Disney is probably the greatest storytellers in the world. And I think that what they've figured out is that storytelling creates lifetime value, right? Like if you look at this idea that Disney has now surpassed more subscriptions than Netflix, yet they don't drive as much revenue. The reason why they're able to do that is because they understand the lifetime value of their client. They understand that if they sell you a subscription for $6 a month that gets your kids hooked on these stories, by the time that your kids are a little bit older and start being able to ask for stuff, you're going to buy them the toys, and then they're going to get a little bit older, and then they're going to go to the theme parks, and then they get a little bit older, and they're going to have kids, and they're going to have to take them to the theme parks, right? Like they figured out how to just like put story into everything, which is why you see them just buying Marvel and all these other like and Star Wars, right? Like Disney just is the vertical integrator of storytelling assets because they understand that this thing is a lifetime value game, and they've just masterfully executed that thing.
That's a really, really great example of it. All right, let's go on to ABT number 3. Topic number 3. Again, I love the fact that you supplied me with intel using the ABT. Here we go. You wrote, businesses need marketing to scale and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in SEO and ads, but have no guarantees that those leads actually drive revenue. Therefore, investing those resources into their highest value relationships is a better idea. So it sounds like a better idea. How exactly do you invest in those relationships? What do you tactically do to invest in those relationships?
So this goes back to that original ABT part of the idea that we all understand that relationships are the building block of business, right? Whether it's the relationships that you have with your clientele, the relationships you have with your team members, the relationships you have with the rest of your ecosystem, your suppliers and stuff like that. But me as a business leader, my time is limited, right? So I can't just hang out on the phone all day talking to my clients and my partners and my team and whatnot. There's stuff that I need to produce. So because of that, people go out there and they hire these SEO agencies, or they hire these ad agencies where basically they're just dumping a bunch of like leads at the top of a funnel. But they look back and that might work for a little while, and cost of client acquisition might go down for a little bit, but long term it starts to keep going up, right? Because it becomes this like leaky kind of bucket. What we contend is that is audience in content creation, right? Like if you're just like thinking, I think that the people that I want to serve want to see this thing, right? And somebody comes to you and says, we're gonna get this thing in front of all these folks. Marketing agencies are going to show up to your house and say, hey, we're going to sit you down and we're going to go through a bunch of meetings to tell you what makes your business special. And then I'm going to tell you how to communicate that. And then I'm going to build out an infrastructure to communicate that. And then I'm going to give you a bunch of homework to fill that infrastructure in order to go send that message out, right? Like that seems like maybe that works. And maybe you've heard that a bunch of times. And maybe the answer is to hire the right one that can do that. But we just think that there's a better way. And that better way is a marketing agency that shows up to your doorstep and says, you know what? We're going to interview you about what makes you special. And we're going to figure that out. And we're going to make content about that we can then use. Then we're going to go out there and interview your 15 favorite clients, and we're going to hear from them what they think. And we're going to ask them the questions to validate whether your points of views are right. And then we're going to create, that's going to give them this experience that, like you just gave them, that, they feel like they're being interviewed and they're being heard, and you're building their relationship with them as a result. And then we're going to make a whole bunch of content mashing up this idea of like what you think is right and what they think is right. And once you're getting, this content of like you and your client speaking the same language, now you can insert that into your existing infrastructure already. And then we're going to take what we learned from that to create the messaging and to create the rest of the infrastructure. And once that infrastructure is ready to go, you already have all the content you need to put it through, right? So it's just a much higher floor of risk mitigation, right? Because at the worst thing that's going to happen in this scenario is you just spend a whole bunch of time getting some intel from your clientele, making a whole bunch of client where you're making a client content that you're making them the star. And if the infrastructure that we build on the back end doesn't really work for you, guess what? You still have these assets, and you still have just nurtured these relationships, and you've gotten these folks closer to you. Whereas, if you take an SEO contract and in 9 months you're not happy with the results, you just basically burned that money.
Yeah, well, if you're a listener out there and you just heard what Pablo said and you have a mind to making a fortune in the advertising world, start that agency. He just gave you the absolute blueprint to it, because nobody is doing that. Nobody's taking the time or investing their time and energy into a client that I'm aware of to really dig up those stories. And that's what you're talking about. You're replacing SEO numbers in analytics and data, and you're turning that into drama by truly understanding the cast of characters that founded the company, what their origin story is, what is their vision story, where are they going, how are they there as a mentor or guide to help you get what you want, and then transferring into the prospect customer world, even the colleague world of being able to recruit and retain the top talent, understanding their stories, where they are on their hero's journey, so you know what story to meet them with so you can connect with their world. And then you go online in the digital world and your SEO and everything else. And that is simply a channel. It's your bookstore. Think of it that way, to share all of the amazing content and amazing stories about what a brand actually makes happen in the world. It's not what they make. Nobody gives a crap about what they make. They don't care about the brand. They may not even care about your origin story unless they can see themselves in that story. Even as they can live vicariously through you. But now you are building that like-minded community that you want to attract in, and you want to tell those stories, so you kick off that relationship flywheel to attract more like-minded people that say, hey, I'm just like Pablo. He's bought into this. I want what he's got out of that. Sign me up. What do I need to do next?
Well said, Park. And I gotta thank you, man. Thank you for validating that. I think it's so obvious, and I don't know why people don't do it this way. So,
it takes effort, man.
Yeah, it takes effort, but
hard work and research, but it's fun research, isn't it?
It's fun research. And I think the big unlock is this idea that you're providing value quicker when you put it this way, right? Like, you would think that what people get lazy about is selling that part. But if you sell it the right way, right? Like, if it's just like, hey man, we're not just going to like throw some stuff on the wall and you're going to pay for it. You're going to get all these assets, right? Like, we used to launch the show kind of the way that the old way, right? Like the way that most marketing agencies are going to do is just come and interview you and try to figure it out and do it themselves. And what we realize is that speed to win really matters, right? So like, this idea that like the chances of me creating a win quicker by re-engaging one of their clients and creating content around them and sharing that content and tagging that client and allowing those feedback loops to start happening as we're designing their show or as we're designing the whole relationship flywheel made us completely re-engineer our launch process, right? So that became the offer that unlocked our ability to sell this thing. And I just want to add a little bit more value, Park, because I do have to assume that there is other people with agencies like mine that listen to your show in order to get better at storytelling like I do. The key to asking those questions and getting that content out of it is what you said. You interview the founders and the leadership team about the vision and the mission and the core values and try to really suss out what their unique selling value propositions are. And you also interview them about every step in the buyer journey, but not from why they're so great. You interview it from what advice you would give to your clientele who was in that spot of the buyer journey, right? Like when somebody is problem unaware but having a problem that you solve, what does their life look like and what advice would you give them? Then they go to problem aware. What does it look like? Then they start like sourcing people. What's it look like? Then they're getting onboarded. What's it look like? What advice do you have to give? Then they're working with someone. What advice do you have to give? And then turn around and have that same exact conversation with their clients, right? So now what you end up coming up with is you get a real understanding of what are the pain points and what are the inflection points of where you can exert influence along the buyer journey, when you can insert these stories. And you come away with these compilation videos of like, hey, if someone gets into your email funnel and they want a quote from you, you can be like, cool, we're going to get you a quote real quick. Do you want like the top 6 pieces of advice from our clientele of what they would tell other people when they're getting quotes from people like us? And you can add that thing to add a little bit of value. But the key in it is the strategy on the front end in order to like know what you want that content to look in on the back end so that you're doing it on the front end and creating a rapid repurposing framework and process so that you're not just spending hours and hours paying editors for what you're going to do. It's just really being able to streamline that piece, and then you can deliver that to people quickly so that they can start getting wins as you are onboarding them and building that credibility with your clientele of you really know what you're about to do for them, because now they're seeing their clients reflected to them in the thing that you're creating.
Amazing. Well, Pablo, I got to tell you, you're a real blessing in my life.
Thanks, man.
This year and years moving on, I was so happy that we got connected through Christopher Lockhead, because as you know, I'm a huge believer in his category design principles as well. And it was fun to see the ABT blow his mind, which then got your attention, and you invited me on your show where we finally got acquainted. But most people in my world probably don't know about you. Therefore, where should we send them for more information, my friend?
Thanks, Park. I think before I start to promote myself, as a podcaster myself, man, I got to say what you do on this show is so good. And if
thank you,
friend that is listening to us right now in your ear, just stop right now, give Park a 5-star rating, write a review if you have time for it. But like the content and the storytelling that you're putting out there is so valuable that I think it'd be remiss not to like encourage whoever is even thinking about tapping into me to just like double tap into you and add a little bit of value. But if you're going to find me, Park, the best thing to do is whatever podcast app you're on, put Pablo Gonzalez in there with a Z at the end, and you're going to find me, which I bring up strategically because as somebody who's called Pablo Gonzalez, I am the John Smith of people that have 6 kids and name them all after themselves. So I've never been able to rank in anything. Yet if you search for me in an audio platform, you're going to find me at the top with my couple of podcasts that I host. And I say that because I really want to encourage your listenership to embrace this idea of long form storytelling through audio, because it's this giant growing medium and it's this really, really valuable real estate that's still really underpriced. So, put Pablo Gonzalez and you're going to find me, Pablo Gonzalez Community or Pablo Gonzalez Networking, and you can find me on Google. But I really want to encourage the audience to do is to start really thinking about how they can build these frameworks to be like consistently storytelling the benefits that they bring to the world through the eyes of the customer. And that's really, I think audio is the perfect medium to really kick that off.
And that's Pablo Gonzalez with the Z at the end, like the mark of Zorro, right? The Zorro of business community development storytelling. You heard it right here first, folks. Pablo Gonzalez, the Zorro of storytelling.
I love it, man. I'm going to use that.
How's that work for you? Hey, man, I really, really appreciate you coming on board. And even more so, I appreciate your friendship and all that I have learned through you and your podcast. So keep up the great work. You're impacting a lot of people around the world out there, Pablo.
Right back at you, brother. Appreciate you, man.
All right. Thank you all for listening to this edition. Hey, man, if you liked what you heard, and why wouldn't you, right? Share it with a friend, family, colleague member, anybody who is in the throes of trying to build that community out there. Maybe they're already having great success, but they want more. Maybe they know how powerful a community can be, but they're not building it there. Therefore, send them on over to Pablo Gonzalez, the Zorro of storytelling in community building, and of course, have them enjoy the show as well. If I can help you with the ABT, like I've helped with Pablo, with Christopher Lockhead, and so many others, come on over to thebusinessofstory.com/ABT. I've got a 1-hour course there, 3 20-minute modules. If you're lazy like me, you only have to do the first module, and you're going to get the sense of the ABT. But the thing is, and it's my own, challenge I put on myself producing it, I think once you take that first 20-minute module, you want to know how it all ends. And so that'll kick you in the gear for module number 2 and module number 3. But here's the thing, and I think, Pablo, maybe you can attest to this. This ABT, from my standpoint, I've been in this advertising, branding, marketing world for 35 plus years, and I wrote Brand Bewitchery with the 10 steps of the story cycle system. That is kind of that relationship flywheel that you and I were talking about in its own right, because it expands. It's an expanding spiral. It expands customer engagement with every revolution of the stories you tell and how you tell them. But that stuff is complicated. Therefore, I found the ABT over a decade ago from Dr. Randy Olson And I have found that it literally is the cornerstone for all communication. You get this narrative intuition down of and, but, and therefore, and it will completely revolutionize how you communicate. It did me, and I wished I had learned it 35 plus years ago. Actually, I wished I had learned it in the 3rd grade. And so now I can help you do the same. Pablo, would you agree with that assessment?
It did me too, Park. I'm somebody that's been obsessed with relationships my entire life, and I know that storytelling is the most powerful tool to build relationships, but in my search of a way to do it, you find all these long form ways that are really complicated, and most of us are not trying to write a screenplay out here, right? So save yourself the time and get yourself into the ABT, whether it's the online class, whether it's the book, whether it's listening to this podcast. It is the simplest, most effective framework that you can just plug everything that you're saying and become, the center of influence that you seek to be.
Folks, and that's businessofstory.com/ABT. You heard it here first. Well, thanks again, Pablo. Thank you all for listening to this edition. And remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that one's a great one. Thanks so much for listening.